Throughout the 1950s and into the 60s, the Republic of China's spy planes played a deadly cat and mouse game with People's Republic fighters. On many nights, lightly armed, slow moving, piston engined bombers and recon aircraft came across the sea, conducting reconnaissance, dropping agents, dropping supplies and propaganda leaflets. Sometimes they successfully avoided detection, slipping in through gaps in radar coverage. But sometimes they didn't, and interceptors raced to find and destroy them. By 1958, the Communists were in possession of several squadrons of Soviet-built MiG-17 PF all-weather fighters. These were equipped with the RP-5 scan-fix radar, which could detect a bomber at about 5 miles. Although unimpressive in isolation, in combination with GCI, it was good enough to locate intruders. But the problem for interceptor pilots was that the obsolete Flying Fortresses and Neptunes flew slowly, cruising at about 180 miles an hour in the case of the B-17 and 210 miles an hour in the speedy Neptune. At these speeds, the MiG-17 was close to a stall. That wouldn't be so much of a problem in daylight, as the fighter could line up and make a fast firing pass. But at night, with limited warning, the task was much more difficult. Pilots had to fight their aircraft while checking the tiny radar screen and searching for any telltale engine flames from the target. Lack of fuel meant that they had only 20 minutes on station in which to execute an attack. Unsurprisingly, they rarely succeeded in even opening fire, let alone downing an aircraft. This frustrating situation caused the PLA to seek a better solution, or rather, a worse one. Their first attempt consisted of modifying 3 of the 300 or so Tu-2 Bat light bombers they had into rudimentary night fighters. They added the RP-5 radar from the MiG-17 PF in the bomber's nose and a 23mm cannon in each wing root. The navigator's station behind the pilot was modified for a second pilot who guided the aircraft during interceptions using the radar scope. The radio man was retained, and the navigator was moved to the gunner's seat. 9 crews from the 25th Bomber Division, based at Lingtong Air Base in the Shanxi province, completed their training in the modified Tu-2 PF in mid-1959. Unfortunately for the PLA, the Tu-2 PF was a disappointment as a night fighter. It was much slower than the MiG-17, although it was more stable and it had more range. All of this looked like a recipe for success. The problem was that it now lacked enough performance margin to make up for the short range of the radar. Getting into position for an intercept required more forewarning and perfect execution. Of course, officially the aircraft was a triumph and all capitalist invaders were successfully repelled. In practice, a different solution was required. Communist China was essentially a cargo cult when it came to aviation in this period. This led to an eclectic mix of types in its inventory, and indeed in 1953 its benefactor to the north supplied 10 Tu-4 Bulls. The Bull, as you'll be aware, was a close copy of the B-29 Super Fortress, examples of which had been forced down in the Soviet Union after raids on Japan and had been retained, then reverse-engineered. They were essentially useless in a strategic bombing role by this point. In 1960, though, a proposal was made to convert one or more of them into a gigantic night fighter. To effect this, the bomber's navigation radar was removed, and an air intercept radar was installed in a larger radome above the fuselage in place of the forward turret. The radar was the same Cobalt-N surface search radar used in some Tu-4s and the first missile-armed Tu-16K Badgers. In this installation, though, it was mounted above the fuselage to scan for airborne targets. Although the Cobalt's range against a surface target was about 60 miles, realistically it would only be able to pick out an aircraft at 10 to 15. The parabolic dish could be steered within an arc in the forward 60 degrees or perform a 360-degree search. This pattern would, however, have likely picked up all sorts of interference from the force-spinning propellers and the Bull's high tail. It's also worth remembering that the Bull was very much not electromagnetically shielded, so the quality of the system was unlikely to have been particularly good. The other 4 gun turrets were retained, 2 under the fuselage, 1 above it, plus the tail position. The radar antenna fin blocked the fire arc directly ahead, but otherwise coverage was good. Each turret carried a pair of 23mm cannons. A rudimentary infrared sight with a range of up to 2 miles was added in each of the gun positions, and a telescope and a powerful searchlight for more basic illumination was fitted in the nose. The large bomb bay was converted into a command post with the radar screen and seats for an airborne intercept officer, 2 navigators and 2 chart plotters. The total system was flight tested for a month at Wukong Air Base, proving the concept, so 3 other Tu-4s were then modified for a total of 4. What they had produced was a monster, the largest air-to-air fighter ever made. It was 99 feet long, had a wingspan of 141 feet, and it weighed somewhere around 110,000 pounds. To give you a sense of scale, the Tu-128 Fiddler, widely accepted to be the largest purpose-built air-to-air fighter to see operational service, was 98 feet long, but its wingspan was only 58 feet, and it weighed a gauzy 88,000 pounds at normal takeoff weight and 96,000 when maximally loaded. The Bull's size came at a cost of speed. The Tu-4P could only make 340 miles an hour flat out. On the other hand, its 6-hour endurance meant that it could trail an intruder for extended periods of time. The conversion was apparently executed with great haste, as the first reported interception mission occurred on the night of March 1st, 1960. Roaring into the air on the 4 mighty engines, the crew must have felt invincible. Be that as it may, they were not effective. A P-2V Neptune entered Chinese airspace over Jiangsu province. A MiG-17 made the initial intercept before ground-based searchlights took over. Eventually, a Tu-4 followed the Taiwanese aircraft for a long time over Henan and Anhui provinces, but without managing to close in for an attack due to lack of speed. The next incident the Tu-4s were involved in was more involved and more calamitous. On the night of the 19th of November 1960, a P-2V penetrated airspace over Wenzhou on a leaflet-dropping mission. Its crew encountered strong resistance. Several MiG-15 day fighters and MiG-17 PFs tried and failed for 2 hours to make an intercept. A Tu-4 also lumbered over to follow the intruder, accompanied in this case by the Tu-2 PF interceptors. 2 of these were launched from Zhengzhou in Henan province. GCI successfully vectored each of them into position behind the intruder, but neither could acquire the target because of jamming from the P-2V. The 2 Tu-2s followed the P-2V for 27 minutes across Henan at 3,000 feet or lower, making 3 attempts to attack. The crew of the Neptune didn't know they were being stalked by a converted World War II light bomber. The signals they intercepted told them that there was a radar-equipped MiG-17 PF around. As the Neptune was heading for the 4,000-foot-tall Mount Song, its pilot, Lieutenant Dai, made a sharp turn while deploying chaff. Flying behind and slightly below the P-2V, the pilot in the leading Tu-2, Group Leader Shang Dezhan, failed to spot his quarry's sharp turn. His wingman, glued to the radar scope, locked onto the chaff, and so the Tu-2 ended up firing at a non-existent target. Tracers blazed out into the night, blinding Shang. He therefore noticed his mistake at the last minute and he pulled up, struggling to climb over the mountain. He failed by 1,000 feet and his Tu-2 slammed into the peak. A maneuver kill for Lieutenant Dai. GCI acquired the P-2V and ordered the other Tu-2 that was still airborne to follow it. A third Tu-2 was also scrambled and it rapidly made contact. But it was the first aircraft that was on the scene earliest. It closed to within less than a mile of the Neptune and then found its radar being jammed. Only 1,000 feet above the ground and with zero visibility, the pilot, Zhao Yongshu, was clearly in a difficult spot. The GCI controller told him to fire anyway. He did so, but was never heard from again. Apparently he was also disorientated by the tracers and he flew into the ground. Kill number 2 for Dai in the Neptune. The remaining Tu-2 was recalled to base. The P-2V returned to its base after a flight of 10 hours and 30 minutes. After a month's hiatus, the next attempt at an intercept was made on the 19th of December 1960. The target was again a P-2V. 3 Tu-4Ps were launched to shoot it down. Apparently, their cobalt radar functioned well. The Neptune's jammers were ineffective against it. The Bull's crew were quickly able to control the intercept without help from ground control, and they made contact with the P-2V, which had descended to just 100 feet. They immediately discovered that the infrared sights they had to target their guns were completely useless. The sights had an error of about 2 degrees and they lacked filtering, resulting in the target looking like a large, fuzzy blob. After several attempts, including one run in which the Bull flew underneath the Neptune, the first Tu-4 scored no hits and eventually it had to break off, having fired 250 rounds. The P-2V carried on with its mission, encountering the third of the Tu-4s. In a dogfight that lasted for 35 minutes, this aircraft also failed to score any hits and the P-2V escaped after a mission that had lasted 14 hours. Curiously, when they got back to base, the crew reported that they'd been attacked by a Yak-25. It was another year before the true identity of the PLA's new Interceptor became clear. On the 4th of November 1961, Lieutenant Colonel Ye Lin and his crew took off and flew north along the mainland coast before flying into Jiangxi, Shandong and Hebei provinces, and then directly over Beijing. Talk about tweaking the tiger's tail. The P-2V was intercepted over Shandong by a Tu-4, which made repeated attacks until the Neptune reached international waters. Cannon fire from the Tu-4 hit the trailing edge of the P-2V's left wing, but it managed to escape and land at Kunsan. This crew was therefore the first to confirm that the large aircraft that had been stalking the overflights for more than a year was a Tu-4. On the night of the 19th of June 1963, a P-2V pilot was intercepted repeatedly as he flew across Shaanxi and Hubei provinces. MiG-17 PFs and Tu-4Ps made 8 unsuccessful attacking runs against him. Sometime later that night, 2 more MiG-17 PFs were scrambled, making some more attacks on the P-2V. The aircraft, though, continued unharmed in a westerly direction, and then was subject to 2 attempted interceptions by Tu-4s. An hour later, the intruder returned within range of the fighters from Zhangtang. The deputy group commander, Wang Wenli, led the interception mission. After unsuccessful attacks guided by the onboard radar, Wang saw a faint blue flame from the intruder's engines. He used the optical sight to fire for 2 seconds at a range of just 300 feet. The target burst into flames and fell to the ground near Linchuan in Shaanxi. After years of trying, this was the first P-2V downed in an air-to-air engagement. It was also the Tu-4P's only success as a night fighter. Although it continued to fly for some years, no other intruders were downed. Continued frustration at their inability to stop Taiwan's overflights led the PLA to attempt to make further modifications to the Tu-4, installing a rotordome on one aircraft for use as a radar picket like the Soviet Tu-126. Work on the resultant Kongjing-1, or KJ-1, began as the Cultural Revolution began to wind down in September 1968. The aircraft carried a 7-metre diameter, 1.2-metre deep glass fibre radar dome on the fuselage, increasing weight by 5 tons and drag by 30%. Since the original engine power was now insufficient, the radial engines were replaced by turboprops. These protruded more than 2 metres further out of the engine nacelles and came with a great deal of extra noise and vibration as well as greater power. Furthermore, the altered centre of mass and even greater drag affected stability, and thus required greater horizontal and vertical stabilizer area and fitment of vertical end plates to improve lateral stability. In order to install the radar and the onboard systems, the cobalt radar and all the turrets were removed. The upper fuselage was strengthened to support the dome, while the bomb bay and several sections were re-equipped with a pressurized cabin for the radar operator and control personnel. Domestically produced analog electronic warning systems, data processing systems, displays, IFF, and a data link were fitted. The data link used a wireless teleprinter, but despite all of the supposedly advanced technology, air zone monitoring, air situation, and interceptor guidance were all done by chartboard mapping. Even so, the aircraft was judged to be as effective as 40 ground-based radar stations when testing began in 1971. Said testing and refinement went on for 8 years, however. There were multiple aircraft control issues caused by propeller wash, engine vibration, and the interaction of the airflow around the dome with other control surfaces. Although contemporary journalism, would have it that the KJ-1 could detect a high-flying bomber at 200 miles and look down to detect a large target flying at wave-top height well beyond 150, In reality, the system appears to have been largely ineffective over land or in anything other than calm seas. It was ultimately cancelled as the 1980s rolled around. Even if the radar had worked, manual tasking of aircraft made the KJ-1 of limited value as an AWACS. As it was, strengthening ground-based defences meant that Taiwanese overflights petered out in the 1970s, and so did the pressing need for an airborne early warning platform. The Tu-4P was, however, not the only attempt to use the bull in an air-to-air role. In 1952, China's Soviet benefactors had launched several G300 air-to-air missile prototypes from a modified Tu-4 known as the G310. Their idea was to create a mobile extension of ground-based defences. The idea, however, came to nothing as planners realised that a conventional intercept would be more effective as it could push attackers further out with less warning. This revelation would lead to multiple generations of Soviet interceptors and eventually to the Moss and mainstay AWACS aircraft. The idea of an airborne battleship was therefore realised just once, and, dubiously effective though it might have been, it was magnificent.